Hello, hello. I hope that you are doing well and taking good care of yourself. My name is Nompumelelo Prudence Gubega. I'm a clinical psychologist and also a traditional healer. I am based in Joburg South in South Africa. Welcome to Black Couch Podcast. Topic for today is navigating a new diagnosis. Have you ever gotten to a place where you never thought you would have a certain diagnosis, and you get to a certain age and you start to realize that actually, sure, as much as the doctor is telling me this diagnosis, I know that I've been having the symptoms of it, but it's so hard for me to accept that this is my new reality. It can also make us question our own identity, more especially when a diagnosis is a chronic one, because that means there's also major changes that need to happen in your life so that to maintain that diagnosis. Sometimes it gets to a point where you're like, I know that my parents had it, or my parents might have had it, but they were never diagnosed with it. So now that I have the resources, there's finally a name to it. It almost feels like it's carrying generational illness that wasn't given a name, and because you are the one that has the resources to actually seek help, that's when you start to get the name for it. It does shake people's identity a lot, because now there is a reality that I'm actually getting older, or I don't know my body the same way that I used to know it, and you find that there's people that would then want to hold on to the old version of themselves before they got a specific diagnosis or before they got sick. But some of them also don't understand that them getting a diagnosis actually puts a label on it, but they have been having symptoms for years and years and years. So getting a diagnosis sometimes can lead to someone having to now start grieving the old self and getting used to this new self that has a diagnosis. You find that there's people that would end up rejecting their bodies because they're of certain inadequacies or inabilities that they are not able to do. But at the same time, you find that there's people that would then get to a point of wanting to know their bodies more so that they learn on how to take care of it. I always say to my patients, when you get a new diagnosis, it actually allows you to be one with your body, because we live so much of our lives doing everything else and distracting ourselves from our own bodies, that we don't really sit and learn to love our bodies from where they are. It almost feels like there's always this high expectations. You would hear people saying, if ever I would get better, then I would start loving my body. Or if ever I would lose weight, then I would start loving my body. And sometimes it's not understanding that in the process of you getting to know to do that, your body is still the same one that keeps showing up for you. So I always ask the question of, all right, so when you get to that destination, this is how you would feel. But what happens to the here and now, where this body that you are rejecting is the same body that is showing up for you? We at times put so much pressure on ourselves that we forget that this body that we are rejecting is the one that we need to actually get to certain points in our lives. It's very important that we rebuild self-compassion, when it comes to loving our bodies. I think one of the things that I usually do when someone has a new diagnosis, whether it's a physical diagnosis, whether it's a mental health diagnosis, is get to know the diagnosis, because now we are realizing that this diagnosis is not going anywhere. It's either you become friends with it or you become against it. And honestly and truly, people that become friends with it end up actually having a fulfilled life than people that are trying to get rid of it. Because in you getting rid of it, that means you also have to reject self, because you and the illness are one that needs to function in the same body. So it's very, very important that while you sit and redefine what your body can do and what it cannot do, you also learn to love it in the process. I always tell my patient that there's this nice quote that I like. And it says, I had a conversation with my body and I told it that I want us to be one. It responded and it said, I've been waiting for you to say that my whole life. So you can't be the one person that needs to show up for your body and wanted to do things when you are the same person that is rejecting it. It almost feels like you are becoming this parent that is always in a space of wanting the child to give more than they could, instead of looking at what they can give at that moment. It is very important as well to redefine the medication, because you find that there's a lot of patients that end up on medication when it comes to certain diagnoses or illnesses that end up on medication. There's people that would say, I don't want to take this medication because it's a constant reminder of what my body cannot do. And then there's people that would say, I want to take the medication because it gives me hope that despite of what my body cannot do, I am helping it to get to a certain place. You find that there's people that have not really grieved who they were before the diagnosis and who they are now. They would relapse and default on medication because their mind is still so much on denial that I actually need this medication to survive. They would actually say, I don't think I need to be dependent on medication. It's also very important to sit, as much as your professionals might share information, let's say about you being diagnosed with depression and anxiety or bipolar or schizophrenia. It's important for you to do your own research. I always say to people, the nicest thing now is that we have everything and information in our fingertips, because you can easily just look at the day in the life of someone that's living with bipolar, a day in the life of someone that's living with hypertension, a day in the life of someone that's living with PCOS, a day in the life of someone that is struggling with infertility. In all of those things, that doesn't only help you to understand that you are not the only one that is going through it. It gives you the shared experience, but it also gives you tips on how you can take care of it, because the shoes of you having a diagnosis, that means someone else has failed them before, and they have learned over the years on how to take care of themselves. And if you are the newbie in it, it is important for you to then learn from people that have been in it for a long time. So I hope that you learn to grieve the person that you were before and learn to embrace the person that you are now with the diagnosis. I hope that you show your body compassion, because despite of everything else, it's still the same body that kept showing up. I hope that you learn to love yourself in every way, even when you are evolving. I hope that you also learn to accept your diagnosis so that you don't have to focus so much on what other people think about it. I always say to people, you don't owe people the answers of your diagnosis. You don't owe them that. You don't owe them an explanation of your diagnosis. If you feel comfortable enough to share it, then great. But if you don't, it is your story and you can choose on where to share it. I'm going to close it there. I hope that you have an amazing week, and love and light.